Story 1. I was home alone one night, though I cannot recall exactly why. All I remember is that my entire family was gone. I was around 15 or 16 years old, and at the time, I was a huge gamer, completely obsessed with StarCraft. Many of my weekends were spent glued to the screen, lost in the game. This happened right before the lockdown started. I was in my bedroom on the first floor, playing StarCraft, when the doorbell rang twice. Not wanting to be away from my game for too long, I hurried to the door. I called out, "Who is it?" as I always did when I was home alone. A soft, weak voice responded, but I could not quite make out what they were saying. It sounded like an older woman. When I opened the door, keeping the storm door locked, I saw an elderly woman standing on the other side with a big smile on her face. Her hands were hidden behind her back. "Through the door?" I asked. "Can I help you?" She said she needed to use a phone and asked if she could come inside. Ever since I was a kid, I had been taught never to let a stranger into the house, no exceptions. That included women. But I felt awkward, unsure how to turn her away politely. I told her there was a library a few blocks down that surely had a phone. Deep down, I knew the library was already closed, but I just wanted to get this stranger off my doorstep. She kept smiling, but her next words did not match her expression. "That is very rude, turning away an old lady asking for help," she said. I awkwardly replied that my parents had a strict rule about not letting strangers inside. As I slowly started closing the door, I apologized. She just stood there, still smiling, but now it felt much more unsettling. I walked back to my room when the doorbell rang again. No way in hell was I opening it. This woman was giving off creepy vibes from the start. Maybe something was wrong with her. Maybe she was confused or lost. But I was not about to take any chances. I ignored the ringing and tried to focus back on my game. Not long after, I heard a faint tapping noise on my bedroom window. It was a metal clinking sound, like something tapping against the glass. My blinds were pulled down, so I could not see who or what was making the noise, but I already had an idea. My room was the only one with a light on in the house. The horrifying realization that the woman had walked around to my window made my stomach drop. I quickly turned off my computer's sound. The tapping continued. That was it. I left the room and went to the living room, sitting in the dark, waiting. The doorbell rang again, multiple times. This was beyond strange. Was this just some confused old woman? I tried to convince myself that was the case. But when the ringing did not stop, I decided to finally confront her. I went to the door and pulled it open, only to find a man standing there instead. He looked about 10 years younger than the woman and said, "Have you seen my mother?" I hesitated but answered, "Yeah, she was just here a little while ago." He apologized, saying she had dementia and had wandered off. I felt a little guilty for turning her away, but then he asked if he could come inside for a minute. Immediately, I felt uneasy. Why did he need to come in? I repeated what I had told the woman, no strangers allowed inside. I mentioned that I had heard noise in the backyard and suggested he check there. He thanked me and walked down the driveway. I assumed he was heading to the backyard, but when I looked through the back window a few moments later, I saw nothing. Neither the woman nor the man was there. I tried to shake it off and went to bed early, leaving the TV on to drown out my thoughts. But just as I started to drift off, that metallic tapping sound returned. My stomach twisted in knots. Slowly, I lifted the blinds just a crack, and there she was. The woman, still smiling. But this time, she was tapping a kitchen knife against my window. I slammed the blinds down and crawled back into bed, heart racing. The doorbell rang again, over and over. I knew I had to wait it out. I did not have a cell phone at the time, and for some reason, calling the police never crossed my mind. I just stayed put until the noise finally stopped. The next morning, I called my dad and told him what happened. He told me I had done the right thing by not opening the door. Everyone agreed. It sounded like an attempted robbery. Maybe the woman did have dementia, and maybe the man really was her son. But why did he ask to come inside? How did he know she had been to my house? And why did he never actually check the backyard like I told him to? Too many unanswered questions. That incident stayed with me. In fact, something happened recently that brought it all rushing back. My friend Cody asked me to watch his dog, Theo, for the night. Theo is a little Pomsky and barks a lot, so when he started barking at something outside, I initially ignored it. But when he went to the back door and kept barking, I figured he needed to go out. As I approached the back door, I realized someone was trying to open it from the outside. Through the screen, I saw a man standing there, staring right at me. He was older, mid-50s, homeless looking. My heart pounded as I asked who he was. He responded, "Have you seen Melissa?" Melissa is Cody's younger sister, in her 20s. Meanwhile, this guy looked like he had nothing to do with her. I told him there was no Melissa here, that he needed to leave. He cocked his head slightly and said, "You sure?" That was it. I told him there were cameras all over the property. He left right after that. When Cody asked his sister if she knew the guy, she had no clue who he was. The fact that he went straight to the back door and tried to let himself in made my skin crawl. Who knows what his actual intentions were? It just proves what I already knew. These kinds of situations can often be avoided by simply keeping your doors locked and trusting your instincts. Story 2. I was 18 when my parents went away on a week-long anniversary trip. By then, my sister had already moved out, so I was left to hold down the fort. Our house sat on a big property, surrounded by woods, with a long dirt driveway leading to a quiet back road. The properties around us were spread out, giving the whole area an isolated feel. It was the kind of town where everybody knew each other. You would see the same faces at the gas station, the grocery store, and, later in life, the bars. Speaking of gas stations, that is where this all started. One day, while my parents were away, I stopped to fill up my tank. As I was pumping gas, a black Jeep Cherokee pulled up to the pump next to mine. A man with a goatee stepped out, greeted me, and started filling his tank. Around here, it was normal for strangers to exchange quick greetings like that. After locking the gas nozzle in place, he walked over to my side of the pump and said, "Excuse me, do you know how to get to the interstate from here?" I did my best to explain the directions, and as I spoke, he pulled out a notepad and started writing them down. That struck me as a little odd. Why not just use his phone like everybody else? He thanked me, then asked if I was from the area. I nodded and told him I had grown up here. He said he was from out of town but never mentioned where. After that, he walked back to his car, removed the nozzle, and before getting in, asked my name. "Kate," I told him. "What a lovely name," he said with a smile before climbing into his Jeep. I got in my car and pulled out first, turning left to head home. It was only a few minutes before I slowed down to turn into my driveway. As I flipped my blinker on and turned in, I caught sight of the vehicle behind me. It was the same black Jeep Cherokee. He did not turn in after me, though. He kept driving straight, going in the complete opposite direction of the interstate, despite the directions I had given him. I figured he had just gotten turned around and forgotten which way to go. I went inside and went about my day, not giving it too much more thought. That night, I was getting ready to go meet up with some friends. As I stepped outside and walked toward my car, I heard footsteps nearby. Given that the house was surrounded by woods and it was the middle of summer, it could have been any number of animals. I brushed it off and left. But when I got back home later that night and started walking from my car to the front door, I heard it, a man's voice calling out from somewhere in the woods. "Kate." Every hair on my body stood on end. My blood turned cold as I whipped around, scanning the darkness. I could not see anything. My heart hammering in my chest, I rushed inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. The neighbors knew my name, but the houses were spread far apart, and there was no reason for one of them to be calling out to me like that, in the dark, without identifying themselves. I grabbed my phone and called my parents. They brushed it off, saying it was probably just a neighbor who would knock on the door if they needed something. I did not tell them about the encounter at the gas station. The next night, Saturday, I spent most of the day at home. Later, I was heading out again to meet up with friends. As I stepped outside and walked toward my car, I heard it again. "Kate." The voice was closer this time. I did not hesitate for a second. I spun around and ran back inside, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and called 911. As I waited for the cops, I texted my family to let them know what was happening. When 2 officers arrived, they searched around the property with their flashlights before coming back to tell me to call again if anything else happened. It was not exactly reassuring. I did not step outside again until the next morning when I had to leave for work. I was a server at a restaurant nearby, working the late shift that day. I left the house in broad daylight, paranoid that I would hear that voice again. Thankfully, I did not. Maybe the police presence had scared them off. After a long shift, I was ready to go home and collapse into bed. As I pulled onto the property and parked my car, I stepped out and heard it again. Footsteps. But this time, it was unmistakable. It was not an animal. I froze on the front deck, waiting, listening. And then I heard it. "Kate, do not call the cops on me again, cutie." I felt my stomach drop. My whole body locked up. And then I snapped out of it and yelled back. "You need help. You are sick." I stormed inside, locked the door, and called the police again. They showed up, searched the area, and left. My parents told me to stay at a friend's house, and I agreed without hesitation. They would be back the following night, so after that, I would feel safe again. I packed a bag and got ready to go. Before stepping outside, I checked the windows to make sure the coast was clear. Then, I locked the door behind me and hurried to my car. Just as I was turning the key in the ignition, I heard something right outside my driver's side window. A man, wearing a face mask, yanked at my door handle, trying to get in. I could not even scream. I felt like I was choking on air as I threw the car into drive. He slammed his elbow into the window, but I was already moving. I veered onto the grass, sped down the driveway, and did not stop until I reached my friend Alex's house. I was hysterical, sobbing as I called Alex and her dad on the phone. Her dad told me he would have picked me up had he known what was going on. Together, we called the police for the third time. A couple of officers went back to my house to investigate. One came to Alex's house to take my statement. The next day, my parents finally came home, and I felt safe staying in my house again. But I have no doubt that the man from the gas station had followed me home, realized I was alone, and spent the next few days tormenting me before he finally made his move. I should not have given him my real name. I should have paid more attention and noticed that he had followed me that day. Some people are just sick, with way too much time on their hands. This whole incident was one of the biggest reasons I moved out to my own apartment just a few months later. Story 3. Growing up in the countryside of Michigan, there was not much to do unless you enjoyed staring at trees and endless fields, with a whole lot of alone time. If that was your thing, it was the perfect place. But for me, I could not wait to get out. The second I had a car and enough cash to make a move, I was gone. It is not that I hated nature, but I would take city life any day. My parents sold that property 5 years ago, so it is no longer in the family, but I remember it well. It was a 3-acre spread, with a big house and a storage building out back. I was 13 when this happened. By that age, my parents often left me home alone. They trusted me because I had matured quickly and took on my fair share of responsibilities around the place. It was a weekend, and I was in the living room playing Vice City on my PlayStation 2 when a sudden, loud metallic crash came from somewhere outside. My stomach dropped. I immediately ran to every window, scanning the yard for anything unusual. At first, I saw nothing. Then, when I got to the window facing the storage building, my heart skipped. I saw the door standing wide open. Without thinking twice, I sprinted to the closet, grabbed the rifle, and stepped outside. I made sure whoever was out there knew I was coming, shouting, "Who is in there?" No response. When I reached the door, I made it crystal clear that I had a gun before peeking inside. The storage building was packed. Everything from the riding lawnmower to the four-wheeler, along with all sorts of smaller tools and supplies. There were countless places for someone to hide. I like to think of myself as pretty fearless for a kid, but at that moment, an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. Instead of going in, I slammed the door shut, locked it, and hurried back inside the house. I locked the doors behind me and sat by the window, eyes locked on the storage building, waiting for that door to swing open again. That door was heavy. It would never open on its own. Somebody had to have been there. Whether they were still inside, I could not be sure. Needing advice, I grabbed the landline phone and called my dad's cell. No answer. I left a voicemail, back when voicemails were still a thing because texting had not taken over yet. Then I went back to my post by the window, turning on the television in the background to make the waiting less nerve-wracking. I was about ready to give up when I heard something that made my skin crawl, creaking from upstairs. My breath hitched. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Was my mind playing tricks on me, or was someone actually inside the house? I was not the kind to run. Even though I never loved that house, it was still my home, my family's home, and I had to protect it. But deep down, I knew I was in way over my head. I took a deep breath, grabbed the rifle again, and headed up the stairs. I stayed silent. Calling out would only give away that I knew someone was there. The upstairs hallway had 5 doors, 4 bedrooms and a bathroom, all of them closed. The sound had come from the side of the house where my parents' room was. Dropping to my knees, I peeked under the door. My breath caught in my throat. 2 bare feet stood facing away from the door. A real person, right there in my house. My body went cold. I was not ready for this. I had no idea what I would do if I had to confront this intruder. I shot to my feet and bolted downstairs. Shutting myself in the bathroom, I grabbed the phone again and tried calling my dad. No answer. Another voicemail. I called again and again, but still nothing. Panic rising, I finally did what I should have done from the start. I dialed 911. Whispering into the phone, I explained everything. The dispatcher told me to stay put and keep quiet. That was when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming down the stairs. They stopped right outside the bathroom door. My breath caught in my throat. Then, a deep voice broke the silence. "What's up, kid?" I will never forget that voice. Even today, if I heard it, I would recognize it instantly. I wanted to cry, but I forced myself to stay strong. Ignoring the dispatcher's advice, I spoke up, my voice loud and firm. "I am on the phone with the police right now, and I have a gun." I switched the call to speaker so the dispatcher's voice filled the room, asking if I was all right. The man jiggled the doorknob, trying to open it. When he realized it was locked, he stood there for a second, then turned and walked away. I heard his footsteps fade, followed by the distant slam of the back door. Relief flooded me, but I stayed put until I heard the sound of sirens outside. When the police arrived, I felt like I could finally breathe again. They searched the house from top to bottom and confirmed that whoever had been there was gone. They asked if I had somewhere safe to stay for the night. I said yes, my uncle's place. We called him, and he came over to talk with the officers before taking me back to his house. The part that still haunts me to this day? It was my fault. When I rushed to check the storage building, I had left the back door unlocked. That was how he got in. Even with a rifle in my hands, I had never felt more helpless. That night was, without a doubt, the most terrifying experience of my life.